In June, I went on a road trip to Colorado, Wyoming, and Montana. We had some bonus trips of New Mexico and Idaho. This is my opening page, just a quick watercolor I did as I prepared and got more excited for the trip. Throughout the sketchbook, I kept various things like our ticket into Yellowstone, the map with its safety guide for buffaloes and bears, and of course trails and things. On the drive to Colorado, which was our first stop, I saw a bunch of windmills and was reminded of Oklahoma. So I felt like painting it, and we kept a list of every animal we identified and all of the wildflowers we identified. I got a little book on the way. One of the things that I got to prep for the trip, and some of the interesting things of note was an elk eating. There was a whole flock. There was a blood trail. We saw a herd of bison, a grizzly bear, a black bear, 5 to 6 baby bison, a peacock, one mama grizzly and her 2 cubs, and 2 mountain goats. And these are part 1 and part 2. Sorry, just part 1 of each of the lists. Part 2 is later. Whenever we got to Colorado, my brother and his wife showed us around, and we saw Pikes Peak and Garden of the Gods in the distance as the sun was setting. It was very nice. The next day, we went on a hike on Catamount Trail, and we passed through this area, which was called Garden of Eden Meadow. And it had this winding trail that wound through a bunch of boulders that were just randomly there. And there was trees in the background. So I tried to paint this from memory. There were a bunch of wildflowers all scattered throughout. I was quite unprepared for the altitude, so I was not quite energetic enough to stop and see what the wildflowers were, to get out my book and take the time to do that. On the 3rd day, we drove to the top of Pikes Peak. I took a picture of it, which I then painted this off of it. Here I kept the log from day 1 all the way to day 10. So June 11th to June 20th was all on one page. After day 10, I kept them with the drawings of the day. I'll go ahead and read one of my favorite days. They were all wonderful days, of course. It was a trip of a lifetime, but this one was my favorite because of how many birds we got to see. Day 5, Monday, June 15th, 2020. I woke up to 20 to 30 geese babies walking past my tent, with about 10 adults following. I watched pelicans and yellow-headed blackbirds. I tried to boil water. It didn't work out too well. Packed up camp after watching birds with Danny while Jorge slept in. We drove to Grand Teton. It was about 3 hours away. It had amazing landscape. Finally figured out the stove thanks to Danny and God. Slept really well and quite warm. On day 4, we went on a hike that went across this beautiful landscape, and we ended up on a sign that said, "Protect the tundra, area closed." So that was awkward, but I got a beautiful view of the mountains in the background, sandwiched between these 2 giant rock outcroppings and this beautiful tundra over there. We also played the license plate game, and we got all the way to 48. And we saw 3 bonus of Ontario, Alberta, and Saskatchewan. Here I did a little sketch of my favorite herb on the trip that we found. It's a wildflower herb. Old man's whiskers is its colloquial name. And it was the wildest thing I've ever seen, just randomly in the woods. I have no idea the etymology of the name, but I think that would be a really fun story to find out. This is a drawing from the morning with the pelicans, the yellow-headed blackbirds, and the geese that walked by my tent. This was a bunch of brush and short grass that the yellow-headed blackbirds were playing in. And then in this lake over here, the pelicans were swimming to and fro. It was really fun to watch. In the background, there was some plains that led up to these beautiful mountains, and I saw some deer playing over there. This one is just a pen drawing I did on the car ride to our next stop. This was Cowdrey Lake. It was a dispersed campground. I was really excited to see Old Faithful. It was raining while we watched it, so we sat waiting for it to go, and then it finally did. It was beautiful. Some more little paper souvenirs and a little gift bag from a mercantile we went to, Smith and Chandler. I loved the pattern. Finally, we got to the Grand Tetons on day 6, and this was our campsite. We were up on a hill overlooking some nice, I don't know, bushes, plants. I'm not sure what they were. They was like scattered, maybe it was sage, and it just went up to the foothills of these beautiful mountains, the 3 peaks. And this one is a mix of watercolor, pen, and pencil. So the mountains were pencil, and down here I just kind of went wild with my pen to see what could happen, and then I watercolored all over it, and the graphite mixed with the watercolor to give this like kind of gray color in the background, which I love. And that is that. That was day 6. In Yellowstone, we got to see Mammoth Springs, which was this wonderfully colorful spring that just climbed and climbed, and it was like little steps of just pools of stuff coming from this spring. And there's just these vibrant colors based off of what bacteria and things lived there. It was like these microscopic colonies, and you could tell what it was based off of the color. One night we actually got to stay in Yellowstone. It was at Madison Junction. That was day 7. It was a little treat to ourselves. And it had this cute little tent spot for us. So it was gravel. We put the tarps down under the tents. This was the boys' and this was mine. I think it rained that night. I'm not super sure. And it had this nice hill that went down to the fire pit, so that whenever it did rain, the water funneled away from our tents instead of back under it. It was quite crowded. We got to get to know our neighbors pretty well. On day 8, we went to Garnett, Montana, which is a ghost town. This is another pen drawing where I just kind of went crazy with my pen to see what would happen, what I could do. Garnett is one of the best preserved ghost towns in the country, I think. This is a little flyer that we got from the Bureau of Land Management. It's got a bunch of stories in it. Then as we were driving into Montana, the speed limit changed to 80 on these mountain roads, which was, none of us could drive quite 80. I think we kept well under the speed limit on those roads. Now here's the map for Glacier. A bit water damaged. It rained on us a few times while we were at Glacier. I'm really proud of these two paintings and drawings. This is of our campsite. We camped on a river. It's called Glacier Rim River Access. It was another dispersed camping site. It's a free camping site that you don't have to pay for, you don't have to reserve. It's first come, first serve. There was a bathroom. There were people having a birthday party who were really nice. And this was my favorite hike. It was about 14 miles round trip to Avalanche Lake Trail on day 10 in Glacier National Park. I really liked how the pen and the watercolor interacted to get that kind of softer effect of the watercolor and then the more defined line of the pen. And in one of the books I read a while back, it said that the way Monet was able to get reflections on water so well with his broad brush marks was that he only ever went horizontally and vertically. So I tried that with my pen mark, and I was pleasantly surprised that it also worked for me. So these two paintings I am very proud of. Trying to figure out how to get my scanner to like to look at them. Have not figured that out yet. We'll get there. Oh, sorry. This was the hike that was 14 miles to Sperry Chalet. Avalanche Lake was probably 3 miles. My bad. But Sperry Chalet, we hiked in the snow. And I was so cold I didn't bother getting out my watercolors, so I just got out my pencil. This was where we saw the 2 mountain goats. They were right around over here. This was a big rocky outcropping I tried to capture. And there was another building up here for skiers to stay at. And we were at I think it was like an office building. And this is the mountains and the clouds up here. And this is another little souvenir. This is from a breakfast just at Eddie's Cafe in Mercantile. I don't remember what I had for breakfast, but I'm sure it was delicious. Here we have part 2 of the animal list and the wildflower list. I have yucca on here, so I guess I counted that as a wildflower. Here is a daily log for Sunday, June 21st, 2020. Here's a Bonneville shooting star that I sketched. That was my favorite that I'd found. Yes, this is describing the 14-mile hike. I will go ahead and read it. Woke up kinda early to get breakfast in Apgar Village with Jorge before trying to get to Avalanche Lake to hike again. Jorge stayed in town. Danny and I were stopped at Lake McDonald Lodge as parking filled, so we hiked about 14 miles to Sperry Chalet and back. Well, 14 miles round trip. We saw a mama grizzly and her 2 cubs only after we were about 10 feet by them because another group of hikers silently waved at us. We kept hiking higher, filled up a water bottle at a waterfall, and used my filter straw. Got pretty cold and we hiked about 20 minutes in the snow until the chalet. Workers were there putting in a railing while I sat and drew the beautiful view. Danny read and we watched 2 mountain goats investigate us. One got on his hind legs and spun 360 degrees. After about 30 to 40 minutes, we went back and shed layers as it got warmer and stopped raining. We hiked from 9:50 in the morning until 4:29 in the afternoon. We met Jorge at the little cafe, and we got fries and hot chocolate to celebrate our hike. We filled 2 water bottle jugs at Apgar Visitor Center and watched Mass in the car as little ground squirrels played in the flowers. Went back to Glacier Rim for our 3rd and final night at the same campsite. Made rice and grits for dinner and went to bed incredibly early because we were so sore already. Thank God for today. Here's another daily log over here for day 12, Monday, June 2020. Sorry, June 22nd of 2020. The little cartoon I drew as the guys were having a nice 2-hour conversation while we were driving. And here it turned into a fair amount of driving, so my drawing kind of dropped off, though I kept the daily logs. This was when we got to marks, so of course I rather spend time talking with family than taking quiet time by myself. Here's another souvenir from a coffee shop. I was sad to leave Montana. Here is where I saw an Oregon Trail sign, which I thought was fascinating. That was really exciting. It's just another pen drawing from when we were driving. And I tried to do it from memory. That's why there's not too many details. Here is the sunset from the last day in Colorado. It was day 14. On our way back, there were some beautiful clouds over this nice plateau-like landscape. And it looked like the clouds were reaching down to touch the ground. And I wanted to capture it because it looked so cool. Here is the randomly placed Rocky Mountain map. Rocky Mountain National Park was our first stop, and it was beautiful, as was the whole trip. Here is my last drawing of the sketchbook. I ended my trip by going to Tishomingo, and this is a tree that got struck by lightning a few years back. It's growing back in nicely, but it kind of has a little awkward gap in the middle. Here are a few wildflowers that I found on the trip. I do not remember their names, though this one is clover. That one I do remember, because there was so much of it. And this was a mountain lily that was everywhere on our hike to Sperry Chalet. It was so cool to see fields and fields of them. And then we have a little tiny forget-me-not. That was just absolutely breathtaking to see fields of this as well. They were scattered throughout on the sides of hiking paths. And then some more as well, some more clover, some little tiny guys. And that's it. Thank you for joining me on my sketchbook tour of the Great Northward Adventure of 2020. Have a wonderful day.